you're working.
Okay, I've just started the recording now.
Okay. So Craig, let me know when you want to go.
I'm ready if you are. Let's roll.
Okay. Can I just start?
You can.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cyber Hawaii's second webinar. We are honored to have many of our partners together, our Chambers of Commerce, our Economic Development Boards, the Better Business Bureau, Hawaii Business Roundtable, representing all of our major islands. We are also thrilled to again be partnering with the Cyber Readiness Institute. And you know, with so many of us working remotely from home, and some money starting to flow to help our unemployed and to help those in need, unfortunately, scams, phishing scams, especially those tied to COVID, are increasing at a very rapid pace. And so we thought it most appropriate and timely to focus our second webinar on COVID phishing scams and ransomware. And we are thrilled to have, in addition to our national partner, two of our Cyber Hawaii members, Jason Ulsh from the FBI, the Cyber Squad, as well as David Rolla with Hawaiian Electric. So thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Craig Moss.
Great, thanks very much, Jen. So it's a pleasure to be back with all my friends in Hawaii. I wish I was there in person instead of in the gray skies of Connecticut right now, but nonetheless, we're off and rolling. So our institute really brings together some leading organizations and a lot of thought on how do you help small and mid-sized business improve cyber readiness. And we develop free content. So everything that we offer is free. We're not giving it away now to sell you something later. It's really a free service. And what we focus on, as I mentioned before, is small, mid-sized business. We receive backing from these organizations, that's what enables us to have the funding to be able to develop the content that we're able to provide all of you, and to work with great partners like Cyber Hawaii on helping the communities to try to improve their cyber readiness. Today, we're going to talk about cyber readiness to prevent phishing attacks, and then I'm also going to cover ransomware. Then we'll turn it over to Jason, and he's going to talk about some of the specific things that the FBI sees and some of the things that they're doing. And then we're going to go to David Rolla from the Hawaiian Electric Company. He's the CISO there, and he's going to talk about some of the very specific things that they see happening within their ecosystem, both from the supply side and the customer side. You can ask questions as we go. In the chat function. This is a comic that I saw probably about 6 weeks ago, right after the pandemic started. And to me, it really captures in many ways what we're facing now. Just as it's changed our lives in terms of working remotely and working from home, it's also changed the strategy of criminals, because they realize that this is an opportunity. Because now people are in an unfamiliar environment. Some of the cybersecurity measures that may have taken place in the office environment are not really up to speed for the remote work. What we focus at the Institute is we focus really at 4 issues: passwords, software updates and patching, phishing, and USBs. We also focus on how to help companies respond to an incident, because no matter how much you prevent, you should assume that there will be an incident at some point, and you should know what to do. Just like fire, right? We all kind of know how to prevent fires, but we all should still have a plan for what happens if there is a fire. We have at our institute, we have a number of guides that get distributed for free. And we also have a more comprehensive program that has these 5 stages here, helping companies to get started, to prioritize what to protect, to develop actual policies. We have templates for that. To roll out the program to your employees, and we have training materials and posters and communications. And then finally, to measure success. And organizations that go through this do receive a certificate of having completed it. One of the things as we talk about the program today, and as we go through and you listen to Jason and David, is we also want you to be thinking about what we call the role of the cyber leader. Inside each organization, no matter how small, no matter how sophisticated your IT presence is, there should be a person that's designated as the cyber leader. And it doesn't have to be the tech people. It could be, we've had great ones that are from HR or from sales and marketing. It's somebody that is just the point person for helping to establish cyber readiness, to understand how to prevent and how to understand what to do in an incident. And specifically in a remote workplace, that cyber leader is really a critical role. So as we talk about some of the specific things, I also want each of you to be thinking about in your organization, who could be an effective cyber leader? It might be you that's on this call right now. It could be somebody else in your organization. But that's a really important piece to this. They're like the champion for cyber readiness inside your organization. So in terms of phishing, phishing is probably the type of issue that most of us are familiar with. It's been in the news a lot for many years now. And just a couple stats here that I find interesting and also useful to get attention of other people in your company. 91% of attacks start with a phishing email. And for those of you in the small, mid-sized businesses, 81% of companies that fell for a phishing attack lost customers. That's critical, absolutely critical. And right now, attackers are taking advantage of remote workers. And Jason is going to talk about that, and David are going to talk about that in more detail. But these are important things for you to understand. Cybersecurity should become embedded in how you operate. But to do that, it needs to be practical. We see a lot of organizations where the pendulum swings too far this way, and they have very, very strict, rigorous cybersecurity policies that become wildly inconvenient. And unfortunately, what we see is that people don't follow them. And you end up with a workaround culture inside the organization instead of a cyber-ready culture. So the basics on phishing, and for some of you, or probably most of you, this is really going to be basic stuff. It's typically an email or a text that is disguised to try to fool you into taking action. And that action usually is to click a link, download an attachment, or to confirm some type and send some kind of sensitive information. This is one of the main gateways that hackers use into accessing your network or your computer. In many cases, it leads to ransomware attacks because once they're in their computer, they can block it and then require you to make a payment in order to unblock it and give you back your data. So these are the basics of phishing. And I'm sure, as I said, most of you are well aware of this. Here's some tips. And again, this is pretty basic stuff. And the Cyber Readiness Institute, we focus less on technology than we do on behavior. So what we believe in a cyber ready organization is that you have behavior, people routinely following certain behaviors that are going to improve the cyber readiness. So one is about checking the email that comes in, the logo, the contact details. Look to train your people to see if there's anything that looks weird. We do a lot of work, actually Microsoft is one of our sponsors. I have gotten many, many fake emails that claim to come from Microsoft. But if you look at it, some of them actually have the name of Redmond, Washington misspelled. So that would be an obvious tip there. The other thing is if you're not familiar with the sender, don't click any link or download any attachments, period. The other thing is if it is somebody within your organization, because now the attacks are relatively sophisticated. I got an email last week from our CEO specifically asking for some information on banking. What we recommend is you pick up the phone or use some other way to contact them. Don't respond to the email, but use some other way to contact them to confirm. we do a lot of work also through our organization with small and mid-sized companies. And I can't tell you how many of them have actually transferred money to false bank accounts, because something comes in and it's like from a vendor saying, hey, we didn't receive your payment. We're going to turn off your whatever your cloud service unless you provide the payment within 48 hours. People get concerned, they start to scramble, and before you know it, they have sent money to a fake account. Confirm through trusted channels. If you need to pick up the phone to do it, pick up the phone to do it. Don't start to send this kind of information without any kind of verification. The other thing is, if you get it, is you should forward the suspicious email to either your IT department or your managed service provider or your cyber leader, and then delete it and empty your trash. You don't want it, in our opinion, you don't want it hanging on your computer, but it is good to send it to somebody else. In this case, never again, don't click on any attachments, but by sending it and forwarding it, then they can investigate it a little more thoroughly. So the transition here to ransomware is that a lot of phishing attacks lead to ransomware. And this is an attack where somebody holds your data hostage for ransom. And they say, well, either they can encrypt it so you can't get it. They'll say, we'll destroy it, we'll corrupt it, we will make it public. Depends on what they think would cause you the most damage, is typically what they're going to say they're going to do. They typically are accessing the two most common that we see, and Jason, you probably know this far, far better, and I'm interested in hearing from you, but is usually phishing or unpatched software. So vulnerabilities that come through software that hasn't been properly patched, which is one of the other 4 core issues that we focus on. So that's what a ransomware attack is. So what do you do? So we think of these things in prepare, respond, and recover. And on the next slide, I'm going to flip back and forth, but we actually have a decision tree here that Jen is going to distribute to all of you that you can use. But if we think about this, I've highlighted here the key things. In preparation, if you've done the backups and tested them, you then can move pretty quickly to respond, which if you have tested backups, you can proceed to recover, because you can already replicate what they're trying to get money from you to have you to pay to release. If you haven't done the backups, your life is a lot more complicated in terms of ransomware. So you can try to, obviously you need to, in any case, remove the infected device, but you can determine the criticality of the data, check your insurance policies to see if they're covered. And again, this is a high stress situation. That's why preparation is so important and having a plan. And you also can try a real-time backup where you start to back things up in real time. It creates a lot of issues when you go to reinstall, but that is something that you can do. Contact law enforcement. And then finally, if you haven't backed things up, at some point, somebody's going to have to decide, are we going to pay or not pay? And we hear different companies talk about different ways to do it. Of course, in general, everybody wants to not pay. So, and then in the recovery stage, over here, again, if you have done the backups, if you've done the proper preparation, you're following this red line, restore from the backup. You can tell the ransomware people to get lost because they don't have anything that you don't have. In any case, when you go to recover, resetting your user IDs and passwords are all critical. Making sure all the software is updated. Plugging whatever leaks, let them in the first place is an important piece. But again, if we look at this decision tree here, and I know it's hard to read at this scale, but the idea is if you flow from the left side, the green areas, from the event, it's pretty simple. So what I want to stress to all of you is if you have tested backups where you've backed up on a regular basis, whatever frequency you feel is good for your organization, and you've actually tested them, ransomware is not as big a crisis as it is if you haven't. So that's the number one message that I want to get across here in terms of that. And then now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and I'm going to go over, and Jason wanted to share a website with you that I'm going to navigate to while he starts to talk.
Great. Thanks so much, Craig. And first off, I appreciate you guys having me. This is a wonderful opportunity to get some needed information out there. So to emphasize some of Craig's points first, phishing is the number one attack vector that we see. It works time and time again for, quite honestly, decades now. Users are often the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain. So I think education is a must. You should routinely train your employees to be on the lookout for these suspicious emails. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an email, but a text message, a phone call, anything that just doesn't seem right, be on the lookout for. And they've unfortunately gotten very, very good over the years where even a seasoned pro, if you will, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. So a mechanism to report, like Craig alluded to, having that cyber leader and an ability to send that email on to be inspected further is a must. I think he had some great points about patching your systems regularly with security updates. Obviously, that applies to your operating systems, any software you may use, as well as your routers, things that you don't necessarily think of all the time. So home routers in particular right now, I would say it behooves all of us to look into and make sure they're secure, particularly with the focus on teleworking right now. Moving on to COVID schemes. Unfortunately, this is something that we've seen for decades. So with every crisis that we encounter, fraudsters and malicious cyber actors alike try to exploit the situation for their own benefit. Their motives are usually the same, but they see more opportunity to strike. So they really use a wide variety of tactics to manipulate people. And in general, they just attempt to play on our fears and need for information. Like I said, it is a recurring theme for decades. I can remember a time after Hurricane Katrina, there were economic stimulus checks coming out, to those affected. And we saw not only fraudsters trying to take advantage of the situation to defraud the government of money, but the other way around as well, posing as someone who was actually affected and attempting to steal their money prior to disbursement. So the unfortunate reality with COVID again is it's something that the likes of which we've never seen. It is so widespread, and it's been going on so long and will continue to go on for quite some time, that I think the amount of fraud and cyber threats that are going to come out of it, again, a scale in which we just have never seen before. So what kind of threats have we seen in general? So Craig has a link to a website that the FBI has put out. It's just fbi.gov/coronavirus. We have been keeping this fairly up to date with themes that we're seeing. And I think themes is an important word to emphasize. To put out information on every scheme that's out there is almost impossible. And the unfortunate reality is people are going to come up with new schemes, different twist on things every single day. So, important to focus on the themes and do your best to not fall for one of these scams. So what are they after, really? So I think it's important to focus on fraud and the cyber threats because we're seeing a lot of both. The goals are typically they're trying to scam someone for money. They're attempting to obtain sensitive information, personal information, things like that. Could be credential harvesting, where they're trying to get your username and password to something, or it could be deployment of malware. That malware could take effect as ransomware, which is obviously a very distasteful type of malware, in my opinion. I think what we've seen in the news, obviously worldwide, is some of this ransomware has been focused towards the healthcare industry. Obviously, that's a crime in any situation, but to deploy something like that, given our current crisis, is just homicidal, in my opinion. We also see, traditional business email compromises, which Craig alluded to, where folks are impersonating individuals and changing wire directions at the last minute, attempting to defraud businesses of quite a bit of money. And the unfortunate reality is we see that it does work. So people do need to be on the lookout for, a changed domain name, a typo here and there. Things. There are clues if you really start to look at these things. Asking for payment in cryptocurrency should always be a red flag. It's not always the case, but if someone is asking you to pay in Bitcoin or Monero or some of these other virtual currencies out there, 9 times out of 10, that's a red flag. So just be aware of that. It's not always the case. People can try and defraud you in good old US dollars. And you should be cognizant of where you're sending money in this regard. Are you sending money to a reputable business, or are you sending it through an individual? Does that individual that you're sending it to have apparent ties to the business you think you're dealing with? Just a healthy dose of skepticism is in order right now. So a note about fraud and or cyber threats. These are general themes, again, that could be either or. So we see fraudulent cures or medical equipment. So the example of personal protective equipment right now. So scammers claim to have a cure for treatment for the virus and will provide for a fee. Even if there is a product at the end of the scheme, it could be extremely dangerous. So kind of like the snake oil salesman, if you will. Again, get your information from a reputable source. Pay attention to what the CDC is saying. They will provide an update if there is a cure to this down the road or any reputable treatment. But if you get an email out of the blue, they probably don't know what they're talking about, is my guess, and I wouldn't fall for it. We've also seen investment opportunities. So obviously the markets have been up and down as of late. A lot of people are out of work. Folks can feel very empowered when they get that email saying, "Hey, I've got a get rich quick scheme." But something to remember is, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. So, and again, this could be a traditional scam, or it could be a malware deployment. So they could have attachments to these emails. They could have links in these emails that take you to a website that infects you. It's really just a bait to get you to open the email and to click the link. Whatever it is that they have to say, they will say. We also see work from home scams. So people are out of work right now. I think I saw in the news this morning, 20 million or so. It's obviously rampant. So if someone you don't know contacts you and wants you to urgently pay them in return for a job, you're dealing with a criminal. Legitimate jobs don't ask you to pay them. It could also present itself as an opportunity to send or move money. So be cognizant of people that are reaching out to you from, a Gmail account or a Yahoo account or any account that is not on the up and up, really. And it could be from any domain, but they'll contact you and basically say, "Hey, can you receive funds for me in your personal bank account?" And then process or transfer the funds via wire to me. And, "Oh, by the way, I'm overseas." That's red flags. We'll often see people posing as U.S. service members or U.S. citizens abroad who've been stranded, things like that. Maybe they claim they've been quarantined overseas and they desperately need this money, but they can't get it out of the country for whatever reason. Typically, these are criminals that you're dealing with. And if you fall for one of these, unfortunately, you may become known what is a money mule. which is a federal crime in and of itself. So just be cognizant of those. We also see people impersonating the government right now. So you might get an email from someone claiming to be with the CDC, saying that, hey, we're conducting a study and we need your personal information. You know, open this attachment, fill it out, click this link, go to our website, things of that nature.
Jason, in particular, you mentioned about personal information and health-related things. Typically, government never asks for certain information over email, right? Like social security numbers or things like that. Is that, maybe tell us a little bit about that and for people to watch out on that.
Absolutely. So you will never get an email from the government saying, hey, you know, click this link, fill out this form, things of that nature, and email it back to us. You know, I can't speak for everywhere in the government, but the FBI in particular would never do that. Typically, if we want to talk to you, you're going to find out whether that's a knock on the door or a phone call or something like that. Other agencies are similar. So, you know, they might send legitimate information by mail. They will always have a way that you can contact them given two-factor authentication, you know, so a trusted phone number. If you do a little bit of research on that phone number, guess what? It comes back to the business in which they say they're from. So again, a healthy dose of skepticism goes a long way in that regard. Other things that we've seen, so any type of email that claiming they can track the virus. There have been a lot of websites out there, again, and this goes to playing on fears, saying that, hey, you can click on our website and we'll track the COVID cases worldwide. Typically, I can't say typically, but a lot of times those are fake domains. They will basically lead to a malware infection of sorts or collection of personal information through those sites. So I know the FBI, in tandem with other agencies, has taken down quite a number of those sites already. Other things to be on the lookout for are charitable contributions, general financial relief. So we have seen folks posing as the Red Cross, things like that, trying to solicit funds. Economic stimulus checks. Obviously, if you get something, you might be inclined to click on that because you know, who doesn't want money from the government, particularly if you're out of work right now. But that could be a scammer. It could be a deployment of malware as well. Airline carrier refunds. So travel is a big thing right now, obviously. A lot of people did have legitimate travel plans, and there have been efforts to refund some of that travel. Again, if you didn't have any travel, chances are no one's going to offer you free money for it. So just be cognizant of that. The other vulnerabilities we see, obviously just with teleworking, like Craig alluded to, a lot of people are at home right now trying to telework. So we're obviously very reliant on video conferencing software, VoIP applications, VPNs, things like that. Malicious cyber actors could pose as a legitimate vendor. So be sure to check with your employer or school to understand what information can be expected. If they reach out and say, hey, you're going to get an email from whatever company to, you know, with your registration information, well, that's a good clue that it might be legitimate. But if you get an email out of the blue from one of these teleworking solution vendors and you're not expecting it, it's probably a scam. So what you can do is, bottom line again, just be skeptical. Like Craig alluded to, patch your systems, regular security updates, use antivirus software, use strong independent passwords for each account. We have seen in the past, so getting back to a scheme that I mentioned earlier, this extortion scheme that has been going on for quite some time. You know, individuals will get a hold of, let's say, a username and a password of yours from one of these huge hacks that have occurred. They might send you an email and say they have compromising information about you, et cetera. And as proof that I have this compromising information, here's a password of yours. Well, guess what? It's a legitimate password. And if you don't have an independent password on each account that you use, they could potentially get into other things. So I know it's a pain, but it is a cyber best practice. You should always have strong independent passwords on each account that you use. Get your news from reputable sources. So CDC, coronavirus.gov. Obviously, I mentioned FBI.gov/coronavirus. You can pay attention to that. Get information from your employer, so they can tell you information about what to expect in teleworking software, things like that. If you're going to buy things online, PPE, for example, go with a reputable vendor that you know can be trusted. And ultimately, and I think Jen is going to send a link to this, perhaps even on the last slide, but if you get suspicious inquiry, think that you may have information on a scheme or a cyber threat, please report it to us at our Internet Crime Complaint Center at www.ic3.gov.
Thanks very much, Jason. That was fascinating, and you know, it's so timely now because with the coronavirus, I mean, everybody is focused on some of the core things to, you know, help their business survive, to adjust to a new work environment, to be able to manage work and kids at home, all these different issues. And I think, you know, paying attention to detail is really one of the keys to preventing some of these phishing attacks or falling for some of these scams. And they're taking advantage of the fact that we're kind of overloaded with a lot of different information coming at us right now. With that, I think we're going to turn it over to David, and hopefully David's audio is working. I'm going to go back to the slides. David, how are you doing?
Hi, good morning, Craig. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Let me get back to the right spot here, and then you're off and running.
Suppose I should say good afternoon. I suspect you are not in Hawaii with us and you're in a different time zone.
I'm actually in the eastern part of the US.
Well, good afternoon in that case.
Yeah, there you go, David. You're all set to go.
Great, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, so what I'd like to share with you today is just, you know, following up on some of the things that Jason and Craig have mentioned. I'd like to share with you some specific examples that we have seen at the electric company here in Hawaii. We're going to start off by showing you some examples of customer fraud and scams that our customers have been subjected to. And then a couple examples of COVID-19 themed phishing emails and fake websites that we've seen. A short discussion on some of the risk mitigation measures that we have implemented in our company to address these risks, and then some conclusions and key takeaways. Next slide, please. Okay, so from the customer perspective, it's unfortunate that scammers are taking advantage of this situation to defraud our customers, but that's the reality of the situation. On the slide here, you can see that I'm sharing an actual news bulletin, a news release that we sent out on March 25th. And it was in response to a wave of fraud reports coming from our customers. On average, we're seeing as many as 20 or 30 per day and over 100 per week. And that's covering our entire service territory, not only on Oahu, but across all of the Hawaiian Islands. And so that's becoming a problem because some of the individuals that are being targeted are not aware of the scams and of course are falling victim to them. So what we've seen, at least in one of the cases that was successful, is that the scammers basically sent a threatening text message to one of the customers and said, hey, if you don't pay, you know, X amount of dollars, we're going to cut off your electricity, and they sent the payment request via a mobile application that you can use to send money, something similar to, you know, PayPal, but it's a mobile application that can be used. And unfortunately, again, you know, without having awareness that these scams are going on, some of the customers are falling victim to these types of scams. So what we're trying to do is, you know, share awareness with our customers through every channel possible, through our, you know, social media channels, and through news releases like the one you see here on the slide. I also included two really random examples of the text messages, and I think Jason mentioned some of these. So these are not specific to Hawaiian Electric, but I just wanted to kind of provide an example of some of the things that are out there, you know, related to COVID-19. And I expect that some of our customers are getting similar text messages, you know, again, threatening them with termination of service if they don't pay. We also have some information from the Better Business Bureau that indicates that scammers are targeting seniors with text messages posing as the U.S. Department of Health and telling them that they need to take a mandatory COVID-19 test to receive the government stimulus payment. So that's another one to be aware of. We've seen news articles indicating that some text messages pushed out a fake news article from Fox promoting CBD oil as a treatment for the virus. And basically this trend has been observed by some cybersecurity researchers. I guess traditionally less than 1% of all text messaging spam, less than 1% of the text messaging traffic was associated with spam. But as of March 17th, they've seen that number rise to as high as 6.5%. And on that day in particular, they said anywhere between tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people in the United States were targeted by spam related or spam messages related to the coronavirus. So those are all some things that you know, we're trying to share with our customers in terms of awareness and making sure that they don't fall victim to these scams. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, the image on the left there is a coronavirus map that is quite popular. If you haven't seen it before, it's basically tracking all of the cases around the world and reporting on the number of reported cases, reporting on testing activity and deaths associated with the virus. Pretty early on after this started gaining popularity, it was reported that scammers had actually duplicated this site and were sending out phishing emails to get people to, you know, click on this site, thinking that they were getting the real authentic information from Johns Hopkins, when in fact they were going to one of these new domains that again Jason mentioned are popping up. So they will create a domain that sounds authentic or legitimate, something like coronavirusmap.com, coronavirus.app, or vaccine-coronavirus.com. They all sound legitimate, but they're not. And some of the scammers have been successful in tricking people to go to this site thinking that it's legitimate. This map apparently is also available on mobile devices, and there are news reports out there that indicate that if you have an Android device and you happen to fall victim to one of those malicious applications, it actually installs a customized version of a spyware, which basically steals control of your Android phone in terms of the microphone and camera. So it can actually, you know, spy on your activity using the microphone and camera just by launching this application on your Android phone. And that's available for free online to anybody that wants to go out and, you know, do malicious things. That spyware software is not something that anybody even has to spend money to obtain. And then Jason also mentioned the CDC and the World Health Organization sending out legitimate emails, but also that scammers are attempting to mimic those emails for malicious purposes. And the information that we've received is that for, at least for the World Health Organization, all of their emails should end with a .int. And if you see anything coming from or reporting to come from the World Health Organization that ends in WHO.com, WHO.org, or WHO-safety.org, those are not legitimate domains associated with World Health Organization, and they're likely to be malicious. On the right, I just provided 2 examples of phishing emails that we've seen internally in the company. The top one is targeting our CEO, and it's coming, looks like it's coming from Dropbox and saying, hey, click on this PDF to get your small business loan payment. And this, this expires in 6 days. So as Jason mentioned, and Craig as well, a lot of these phishing emails include something to indicate a sense of urgency to make you more inclined to click on them. The one on the lower right is purportedly coming from the Department of Health and targeting one of our employees. And again, just indicating that it's from a legitimate source. But what you can see in the small box, if you can read the fine print, is that actually whenever we mouse over that that link, it doesn't go to cdc.gov. It actually goes to some malicious domain in a .cz domain. So those are just things to be aware of. Again, even if the sender address looks legitimate, in most cases it's better to go to a web browser and navigate to that site directly to look for the information that was indicated in the email rather than clicking on any links that were in the email. Next slide, please. Okay, so here, recognizing that we're a pretty large organization with resources that may not be available to smaller businesses, I'll just start by saying that, not all of these solutions may be available to everybody, but I just wanted to share with everyone a sense of what we've been doing to protect our infrastructure and to protect our remotely working employees, to ensure that this work from home situation doesn't result in any additional risk to us. So first of all, as Craig and Jason mentioned, increasing awareness of the threats, that's a key one, just to make sure that people are constantly thinking about whether these COVID-19 themed emails that are coming in are actually legitimate or not. We're sharing links to CISA and other government resources for tips and guidance. And we're sending this out on a regular cadence. So pretty much every day or every other day, there's an email going out to the company to say, hey, here's what we're seeing, here's some things to be aware of, and here's some best practices to avoid falling for these traps. Some other things we did, which actually we had in our plans, but had to accelerate them due to the COVID-19 situation, was increasing our internet bandwidth to make sure that we didn't exceed the capacity for all the remote workers, as well as our VPN solution. So our VPN solution was, we had plans to upgrade it this year, and we had to kind of pull that forward a couple months and accelerate it to make sure that we could adjust to the work from home situation without any service impact. And then the third bullet there are things that we've really had in place for a long time, since before the pandemic started. And again, this may or may not be things that smaller businesses have the luxury of implementing, but what we've done is for anybody that needs to have full unrestricted VPN access to the company networks, meaning when they're working from home, it's basically transparent to them that they're working from home and they have access to all of the resources that they would have access to if they were connected to the network on premise. Basically, we only allow that through company-issued laptops with a certificate on them that is authenticated before the VPN connection is successful. And by doing that, we can ensure that the full protection of our cybersecurity protection capabilities are applied remotely to those company laptops. For those that don't have a company-issued laptop, and that mostly applies to our contractors and consultants, we basically give them access to a limited segment of the network that is protected and monitored more closely. And we do that by using something called a jump host. So they connect into this jump host, which then gives them, again, access to this restricted subnet of our network that has just a few applications that the contractors or consultants need access to. And the last sub-bullet there is an important one. We enforce multi-factor authentication for all remote access services. And that's a really important one, we think, because you know, Jason had mentioned the importance of not using passwords on separate accounts and using complex passwords. And we believe that this is another way that you can reduce the risk that your credentials are reused or stolen or compromised by using two-factor authentication in addition to your username and password for remote access. And then the last two bullets there, we're monitoring for VPN security events more closely than we had been in the past due to the high volume of usage. And we're also, we also had to make a few adjustments to our maintenance practices in terms of vulnerability scanning and patching so that you know, these devices that are no longer on the internal network are still subject to vulnerability scans and they're still receiving the patches remotely. Next slide.
You know, David, you just brought up a couple points.
So key takeaways, you know, you have to think of your customers, especially if you're in a service business like Hawaiian Electric is. So our recommendation there is to be proactive with your awareness notifications to the customers and try to help them be aware of scams and fraud. Protect your employees. So most of the things that I mentioned on the previous slide, again, you may or may not be able to do depending on the resources available to you, but multi-factor authentication is highly recommended if you can do it. And strictly enforcing the remote access security controls, as I mentioned, if you can try to find a way to enforce least privilege and just give your employees or your contractors access to just what they need. That's the recommended practice to reduce the risk there. And then again, we're recommending that if you can, you should try to monitor more closely your remote access for anomalous events. And last but not least, we didn't mention this much during the previous slides, but your business partners, contractors, and suppliers may be, you know, a weakness that that adversaries can exploit to get access to your network. So even if you have the best security posture and the best practices in place, if you're allowing a business partner or a contractor to connect to your network and they're not practicing an equivalent level of security, then basically they're the weak link in the chain and you can be compromised quite easily just by not having an awareness of their level of security. You know, most of you are familiar with the Target breach that happened in 2014, and that was, you know, a case that's most often reported as being an incident that was initiated by an employee at a refrigeration contractor for Target that was compromised by a phishing email, and that led to ultimately to the compromise of the Target network. And according to a survey in 2018 by the Ponemon Institute, about 56% of organizations have had a breach that was caused by one of their vendors. So really important to, again, keep your vendors, contractors, and suppliers in mind when you think about cybersecurity and try to apply the same level of scrutiny to them that you would to your own employees and users. And with that, that's all I had for today, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So David, thanks so much. And one of the things that you mentioned that we really advocate at the Cyber Readiness Institute is strong passwords. We actually advocate passphrases or passwords of 16 characters. And passphrases we find are easier for people to remember. And multi-factor authentication is absolutely critical. It should be turned on in every type of device or software that allows it. It should just become standard operating procedure for people. We know it's not quite as convenient, but as with other things in life, sometimes you have to trade convenience for security. And this is a case where multi-factor authentication is well worth it from a security standpoint. So we have some questions that came in. This is just an example of the type of posters and things like that we provide to organizations. And I think, Marion, we had a few questions come in that you want us to respond to?
Yes, so I think I'll start with the first one that was submitted, which happened during your part, Craig, and someone was asking if you could explain what you mean by tested backup.
Yeah, I mean, that just means that you've actually tested reinstalling it, because sometimes people back things up and they keep backing it up time and time again, but they've never actually tested the reinstallation part. So by tested backup, we mean that you actually have tried to reinstall it back into your operating system or into your network.
Thanks.
David,
And then someone else was asking about, they received an email 2 weeks ago asking for money. They weren't familiar with cyber scams, so they forwarded it to their board of directors, and they want to know if they caused a problem for their board members because they forwarded the email.
I would let Jason answer that. My sense is no, as long as they put some kind of alert in it, you know, when they forwarded it and some kind of alert, just to tip them off to take a careful look and not to act on it. But Jason, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. Again, it all comes down to user, training and education about these scams. So as long as you put some kind of tip in there to say, hey, I think this is a scam or something like that, it's probably fine. If you didn't, for whatever reason, I would alert them to that and try and track it down. But I think that goes back to Craig's original point, to have a cyber leader in your organization, a place where you can send suspicious inquiries such as that to, so that they can look into it a little bit more.
Okay, thank you for that. And then another question here. Someone wants to know, with the government relaxing telehealth connectivity, i.e. people can now use unsecured platforms like Skype, FaceTime, speak to doctors, does this create a problem with HIPAA where others can access patient information? And I guess before we get an answer from one of our speakers, I'll quickly point out that the Cyber Readiness Institute is currently working on a telehealth guide of best practices that we're going to be releasing on our remote work resources in the coming weeks. So I'll let whoever of our speakers would like to address that question, but just wanted to start with that first of all.
Thanks, David. Any comments from your side on that?
Hi, I'm sorry, Marion, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. So someone's wondering about telehealth and whether unsecured platforms like Skype and FaceTime and those kinds of non-HIPAA compliant softwares that people are using to speak to doctors, if that's creating a problem with HIPAA and others accessing patient information might be confidential.
Yeah, that's a great question, I think. And I'll start with a caveat that I'm not in the healthcare profession and not familiar as much as others maybe with the HIPAA regulations. But from a general perspective, yeah, anytime that you're being asked to share sensitive information, personal information over non-secure channels, you're putting yourself at risk that others that are not authorized to get access to that information will have access to the information. So I think my advice there would be to, you know, as Craig indicated and Jason indicated, try to work with reputable providers. I would think that some of the more well-established providers do have secure methods of sharing that information. And if they're asking you to share it through non-secure means, then I would suggest that you follow up with them and explain to them that you're not comfortable putting your sensitive information out there on these insecure channels, and ask if they have an alternative solution that can be used.
Marion, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, so actually someone had submitted a question ahead of time, which I think was mainly directed at Jason, asking about a situation where I think this person was a victim of a ransomware attack, and he had losses of at least $10,000 from 3 attacks. He didn't pay, but he had to get a new computer and replace the hard drives 3 times, and installing backup systems and everything for his small business. So he was saying that he filed once with the FBI, but he wants to know what more can be done, because prudency and watching for unusual email addresses and deleting any unknown emails is helpful, but it would be more helpful if some of these people were caught, imprisoned, or fined and their actions made public. So just looking for some advice on what more can be done.
Sure, absolutely. So first, that kind of stems into another question that I answered. I don't know if the group can see it or not, but the question was essentially, you know, filed a lot of complaints on ic3.gov. Should I continue to file, et cetera, et cetera? The answer is yes, you should continue to file. I know it can be at times frustrating when you file a complaint and you don't get a call back from the FBI, et cetera. Typically, you know, I hope everyone understands the FBI can't investigate every single thing that comes in the door, but it is important to report those instances because it gives us the ability to track broad themes, perhaps identify the highest priority investigations that we're able to tackle. In terms of the ransomware attack, I can tell you that is something the FBI is very, very interested in right now. So great job reporting it. I'm glad you did. In terms of catching the criminals, I'm sure you can imagine that these are very complex investigations, often with ties overseas. So we do aggressively investigate them. We work with our foreign partners as best we can to bring them to justice. And in a lot of situations, we can affect them, even if we can't get to them physically with, you know, extradition treaties being what they are. We try and affect bank accounts, things like that, to disrupt their activities. So again, I know an ideal situation is to put cuffs on them and march them before the judge. That will always be our goal, but that's not the only way to affect them. So again, continue to report, but I do think the best defense, if you will, is, like Craig alluded to, having a strong system for backups, and then practicing good cyber hygiene with patching your systems, using strong passwords and things like that.
Thanks very much, Jason and David. Jen, back to you. I think we're at the top of the hour and we've got to wrap up. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, I'm just going to say thank you, everybody. Thank you to our partners. Thank you to our awesome panelists. And always, we're always honored to be able to include our national partner, Cyber Readiness Institute. Thank you all, and be safe out there. Aloha.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.